felt it before you saw it. That shift in energy, the way their tone changed half a second too late, the silence that lingered just a bit too long. You picked it up in their micro movements, their mismatched words, their recycled affection that smelled like script. They called it paranoia, laughed it off as overthinking, but deep down, they knew you weren't wrong. They questioned your sixth sense because they feared what it might expose. They tried to gaslight your intuition into silence, tried to make you believe that doubt was delusion. But you didn't need evidence. You knew. You felt. And what they didn't understand is that you weren't guessing. You were listening, with something deeper than ears. They questioned your sixth sense, and it replied, not with anger, not with fire, but with truth, the kind they can't hide from anymore. You read people before they opened their mouths, not because you're magical, but because you're observant in ways that threaten the dishonest. Your empathy is a radar. It tunes into discomfort, disruption, and duplicity. They hated that you noticed what they tried to bury, that you sensed the weight behind their words, the intention under their compliments, the performance wrapped around their pain. You didn't accuse. You didn't shout. You simply changed your posture, pulled back, measured their inconsistency against your instinct. And still, they called you dramatic. But what they really meant was, you see too much. And the world has never been kind to the ones who see through masks without tearing them off. They mistook your silence for surrender, your distance for guilt. But that distance wasn't shame, it was strategy. You let them believe they had fooled you. You let them think their lie had landed. Because what they didn't realize is that your intuition doesn't react. It watches. It collects. It weaves patterns out of their chaos. You knew what they were before they admitted it. You didn't need confessions. You needed confirmation. And once you got it, you were gone. No farewell speech, no dramatic closing act, just exit. Quiet. Surgical. Divine. Because the intuition they mocked became the compass you trusted. And while they were trying to manipulate your mind, your spirit had already packed its bags. Psychologically, we're wired to ignore intuition in favor of proof. But proof is the language of the logical. Intuition is the language of survival. It doesn't whisper, it warns. And when you stopped ignoring that voice, you stopped walking into traps with your eyes wide open. You stopped asking questions they'd never answer honestly. You stopped betraying yourself for the comfort of being accepted by liars. And the moment you listened fully, the spell broke. They lost their hold, not because they confessed, but because you no longer needed their lies to make sense of the truth. They tried to convince others that you were unstable, that your instincts were symptoms, not signals. But now, those same people watch you flourish while the ones who cast shadows collapse in their own dishonesty. You didn't just sense their deception, you predicted it, not with fortune teller flair, but with psychological precision, with body language decoded, patterns tracked, empathy weaponized in the name of truth. You turn your intuition into intel, into insight, into indifference. And that's what haunts them now. Not your confrontation, but your absence. You were supposed to beg. You chose to believe yourself instead. They still think about how you knew, about the way you looked at them that final time, as if you'd already said goodbye months before. And the truth is, you had. Your intuition breaks up long before your body does. It doesn't wait for evidence to file an emotional divorce. That look you gave was closure. Not for you, for them. Because nothing shakes a liar more than the realization that you figured them out and still stayed silent, not to protect them, but to protect your own peace. Your sixth sense whispered they are not who they pretend to be, and instead of begging for proof, you listened. You don't owe anyone a courtroom when your soul already rendered the verdict. You no longer justify your distance. You no longer feel guilty for seeing what others miss. Because people who live in performance hate the ones who remember vibes more than words, who remember silence more than apologies. You weren't suspicious. You were sensitive. You weren't wrong. You were early. And now, they rehearse new masks, new lines, new distractions, but none of them land because they know. You see past every one of them. They question who told you. The answer still stings. You told yourself. You become a mirror they avoid, not because it exposes them, but because it no longer reflects their illusion. They want you reactive, they want you confused, but you've entered a new level of discernment where confusion can't live. You see through charm like glass. You feel dissonance like a scream. You read tension like a script. And the people who tried to break you now fear your ability to read them. They can't manipulate what you no longer need to believe. That's the part they never planned for. Your detachment. Forged from intuition finally honored. Let them question your gift. Let them cast shadows on your clarity. You don't need consensus. You don't need confirmation. You need alignment. Your sixth sense is not a flaw. It's not a myth. It's your early warning system. And now it's your sword. You no longer give second chances to red flags dressed as apologies. You no longer abandon your inner knowing for a seat at someone else's collapsing table. You trust the voice inside, the one that told you who they really were before their lies were even complete. And when your intuition replies, it replies without apology. You didn't need to expose them. You didn't have to. Your presence did it for you. The clarity in your eyes, the purity in your questions, the way your silence held more weight than their loudest accusations. It was unbearable to them. You didn't accuse. You didn't retaliate. You simply existed, without distortion, and that alone felt like violence to someone built entirely on masks. A pure intuition and a pure soul always rubs toxic people the wrong way. Not because you're flawed, but because you aren't. Your peace makes their chaos louder. Your honesty makes their manipulation more transparent. Your discernment dismantles their illusions. You don't even need to try. Just by breathing truth, you suffocate their performance, and they know it. Toxic people operate in distortion. Their survival depends on things being just murky enough that no one can see the outline of the truth. They thrive in confusion, in gray areas, and ambiguity, where they can twist narratives and control perceptions. But you walked in with clean hands, with unfiltered insight, with the ability to feel beneath what was being said. You weren't fooled by the tone. They hated that. You noticed the tremble in their timing, the flicker in their gaze. You picked up the emotional temperature in rooms most people called warm. You read the air, and they called you intense. They called you difficult. But the truth is, they were just uncomfortable being seen without armor. You didn't use your intuition to control. You used it to understand. That's the part they couldn't process, because they assumed everyone like them had an agenda. But your purity disarmed them. At first, until it threatened to unravel their story. Because pure intuition doesn't need evidence. It just knows. And toxic people hate what cannot be explained away. They hate what cannot be reasoned out of existence. The betrayal coming before the lie was told. You sensed the envy behind the smile. You saw the fracture behind the pride, and instead of exploiting it, you left. Quietly, and that made you unforgettable. You made them uncomfortable by existing in alignment. That was your crime. You didn't shift to make them more comfortable. You didn't dim to keep the peace. You stood there, anchored in your truth, unwilling to play small so they could feel large. And that truth, it acted like a spotlight. It illuminated their insecurities, their inconsistency, their internal corruption. They were drawn to you because you were everything they claimed to be, and then they grew to hate you, because you actually were. You reminded them of what they abandoned to survive, and now they can't look at you without hearing the voice they silenced in themselves. Psychologically, people who are committed to dysfunction cannot handle those who see them clearly without judgment, because it removes their favorite weapon, blame. You saw them not as evil, but as broken, not as powerful, but as scared. And when someone sees you as small in your most manipulative state, you have two choices: transform or destroy the mirror. They chose the latter. They tried to stain your name, twist your actions, call your intuition overthinking. But nothing they did changed what was already known. You were the calm that made their chaos visible. They can't replicate what you are. That's what still burns. They can copy aesthetics. They can rehearse kindness, but they cannot fabricate resonance. And when you speak, people feel it. When you look, people pause. When you walk, people sense purpose. That purity radiates, not from your perfection, but from your refusal to perform. You don't lie to get love. You don't manipulate to keep company. And to a toxic soul, that's terrifying, because it means you cannot be controlled. You don't chase, you choose. And they were never chosen again after you knew them. Now they tell others you're too sensitive, that you read into things too much, but their tone gives them away. It shakes, because even in your absence, you hold presence. You still linger in the corners of their conversations, not as a warning, but as a witness. You didn't destroy them. You didn't need to. You became the quiet contradiction to everything they sold themselves as. And that contradiction walks taller, speaks softer, and carries peace they never earned. That's the deepest cut. They hoped you'd disappear, but you became proof. You don't belong in their circles anymore, not because you were rejected, but because you evolved. You outgrew manipulation disguised as intimacy. You outgrew friendships based on trauma bonding and approval seeking. You no longer seek understanding from the ones who fear transparency. You no longer carry empathy into battles designed to break it. And they feel that distance. It wraps around them like silence, cold and echoing. You didn't abandon them. You just stopped carrying people who insisted on breaking the floor beneath you. Let them be rubbed the wrong way. Let them flinch at your clarity. Let them wince when your name comes up. You don't owe them softness for the sake of their comfort. You are not responsible for how your presence exposes their absence. You are not obligated to silence your gift so their dysfunction can feel safe. Your intuition is not a threat, it's a compass. And your soul is not too much. It's too honest for the ones who thrive and fall. Let them tremble, let them mislabel you. Just remember, their discomfort in your presence was always the clearest confirmation that you were never the problem.